I found out my husband was planning to spend our 5th wedding anniversary making my sister his wife for the day, instead of screaming or filing for an immediate divorce. I drove to their luxury hotel, bribed the housekeeper, and set up a high-definition hidden camera in the air vent. I let him cross the ultimate line, knowing their little getaway was going to cost them both their entire empires. My name is Kiara. I am 32 years old, and for my whole life, my family treated me like a glorified furniture mover. If you are watching this and have ever been pushed to the edge by the people who were supposed to protect you, hit the like button and subscribe. You will want to hear exactly how I burned their perfect worlds to the ground. It was a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my downtown Atlanta office, syncing my new tablet to the cloud network I shared with my husband Marcus. We had been married for exactly 5 years. He was an investment banker, the kind of man who measured his worth by the label on his suit and the status of his dinner companions. I thought we were functional. But as the device finished syncing, a string of messages popped up on the screen. They were from Marcus, sent to a contact, saved under a fake corporate name. The picture attached to the message was unmistakable. It was my younger sister, Tasha. The message read, "The St. Regis is booked for our anniversary this weekend. I want you to be my wife for a day." "Preston still thinks you are at the wellness retreat, right?" Tasha replied instantly. A heart emoji followed by, "Yes, he thinks I am detoxing. I cannot wait to be yours, Marcus." My chest tightened, but I did not cry. I did not throw the device against the wall. Growing up as the scapegoat in an affluent African-American family teaches you how to swallow your pain and calculate your next move. My mother, Valerie, had always worshipped Tasha. Tasha was the golden child, the lifestyle influencer who secured her spot in elite society by marrying Preston, a wealthy white tech executive. I was just Kiara, the disappointment who staged houses for a living. They thought I simply moved couches around to make other people look rich. They had no idea I secretly owned the commercial properties. I staged quietly building a real estate portfolio that rivaled Preston in net worth. I grabbed my car keys and drove straight to the luxury hotel in Buckhead. I walked into the grand lobby with the kind of absolute confidence that money buys. A crisp $100 bill to the right housekeeper got me access to the penthouse suite Marcus had booked under his own name. The room was immaculate, decorated with rose petals and a bottle of expensive champagne chilling on ice. It was the anniversary celebration I was supposed to have given to the sister who spent her life trying to outshine me. I pulled a tiny high-definition camera from my staging toolkit. I pulled over a velvet chair, stood on it, and installed the lens directly inside the air vent above the massive king bed. Before walking out the door, I took off my diamond wedding band. I dropped it straight into the champagne glass, chilling by the nightstand. Let them drink to that. I got back into my car, my hands perfectly steady on the steering wheel as I merged onto the highway. The Bluetooth system chimed, echoing through the car speakers. It was my mother, Valerie. She did not say hello. She certainly did not say happy anniversary. "Kiara," she barked immediately. "Tasha is renewing her vows with Preston next month. I need you to bring some of your cheap staging furniture to decorate the estate garden, and do not even think about charging your sister. You know Preston is inviting half the state senators and the entire country club board. Do not embarrass us by being difficult." I gripped the steering wheel, staring blankly at the road ahead. "Mom, it is my anniversary today," I said calmly, testing the waters to see if she possessed a single ounce of maternal instinct. Valerie scoffed loudly, the sound filled with disdain. "Oh, please, Marcus is probably working late to support your little hobby. Tasha has real responsibilities now that she is managing a major household. Just have the furniture there by Thursday and make sure you wear something appropriate for once. We have an image to uphold." She disconnected the call before I could reply. I pulled into the driveway of my house, the evening shadows stretching long across the manicured lawn. There was a sleek black vehicle parked illegally on the street. As I stepped out of my car, a tall figure emerged from the deep darkness of my front porch. It was Julian Marcus, and his older brother Julian was a ruthless venture capitalist, the absolute black sheep of his family because he built his own wealth instead of relying on generational trust funds. He was sharp, intimidating, and the only person who ever looked at me like I was a genuine threat rather than a prop. He walked toward me, his face completely unreadable under the dim glow of the streetlights. Without a single word of polite greeting, he tossed a thick, heavy financial dossier straight onto the hood of my car. The papers spilled out slightly, revealing highlighted bank transfers and corporate seals. "How long were you going to play blind?" "Kiara," he asked, his voice sharp and cold, slicing right through the evening air. "Marcus is using your staging company to launder money for Tasha and her cosmetics line." I stood frozen. The betrayal was no longer just about marriage. It was a calculated financial execution, and I was the target. I realized they were working together to completely destroy me. I took the heavy financial dossier from Julian as we stood in the cool night air outside my home. The documents he handed me proved everything I had suspected. My own husband was bleeding my business dry to fund my sister and her lavish habits. I did not scream or break down crying. I simply thanked Julian, locked the files in my heavy steel safe, and prepared my mind for Sunday dinner. Walking into Tasha and Preston's sprawling Buckhead estate was always an exercise in sheer psychological endurance. The house was a massive glass and stone monument to tech industry money. Preston had made an absolute fortune in software development, and Tasha treated his bank accounts like her personal kingdom. Tonight was a special family dinner ostensibly planned to celebrate their upcoming vow renewal. I wore a simple tailored black dress blending into the background, which was exactly how my mother Valerie preferred it. She always wanted Tasha to shine brightly while I remained invisible to the world. Marcus pulled out my dining chair, kissing my cheek with a heavily practiced smile. He played the doting husband perfectly, pouring my sparkling water and resting his hand affectionately on my thigh. Anyone looking at us would think we were the perfect power couple. I knew his hand was the exact same one that had been tangled in my sister's hair 2 nights ago at the luxury hotel. Tasha sat at the head of the table right next to Preston. She was draped in a designer silk slip dress, her collarbone highlighted by a brand new glittering diamond necklace. Valerie could not stop staring at the jewelry. "Oh, Tasha, that piece is absolutely stunning," Valerie gushed, reaching across the long table to admire the diamonds. "Preston, you spoil her too much. A successful husband should worship his beautiful wife." Tasha smirked, running her perfectly manicured fingers over the heavy necklace. "Preston is just so generous. He knows exactly how to treat a woman who knows her worth." I glanced sideways at Preston. He was a quiet, calculating white man who rarely spoke at these loud family gatherings. He looked at the heavy diamond necklace, his brow furrowing slightly. He took a slow sip of his expensive bourbon, remaining completely silent. He knew for a fact he had not bought that necklace. He was a man who meticulously tracked every single penny of his massive fortune, but he was observing the room, waiting patiently to see how the situation played out. I reached my hand into my designer clutch. My fingers brushed against the crumpled piece of receipt paper I had extracted from Marcus' suit jacket earlier that morning. I pulled it out and placed it smoothly on the center of the table, right next to the lavish floral centerpiece. "That is a truly beautiful Cartier piece, Tasha," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying clearly across the dining room. "I am just a little confused. Did the luxury hotel spa start handing out $30,000 diamond necklaces as complimentary gifts for their exclusive wellness retreats?" The clinking of expensive silverware stopped instantly. Marcus' hand tightened around his wine glass until his knuckles turned stark white. Tasha froze completely, her hand dropping swiftly from her neck. "What are you talking about, Kiara?" Tasha asked, her voice pitching noticeably higher. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the paper receipt. "I am talking about this receipt I found stuffed in my husband's jacket. Marcus bought that exact Cartier necklace on Tuesday. The very same day he booked a penthouse suite downtown. The very same day you supposedly checked into a wellness retreat where cell phones were strictly prohibited. Funny how the dates and the diamonds aligned so perfectly." Before Marcus could even open his mouth, my mother launched her relentless attack. She slammed her palm flat against the mahogany table, shaking the delicate crystal glasses. "You are completely out of your mind." "Kiara, Valerie snapped, her voice sharp and filled with venom. Are you really sitting at your sister table in her husband, multi-million-dollar home, accusing her of sleeping with your husband? You are paranoid. You have always been terribly jealous of Tasha. Ever since she married Preston and secured a real future for herself, you have been incredibly bitter. You cannot stand that she has a high society lifestyle, while you are just moving furniture for a living. Marcus immediately seized the convenient lifeline my mother threw him. He stood up, looking at me with an expression of profound disappointment. Kiara, you ruined the entire surprise, he said, shaking his head, acting exactly like a wounded martyr. I bought that necklace for you. Our 5th anniversary was this week. I was holding on to the receipt because I needed to get the gold clasp resized. I cannot believe you would embarrass me and aggressively insult your sister like this over a beautiful gift I bought to celebrate our marriage. Right on cue, Tasha buried her face in her hands, forcing out a loud, dramatic sob. How could you say something so disgusting to me, Kiara? Tasha cried, leaning heavily into Preston, broad shoulder. I am pouring my heart into planning my vow renewal, and you are trying to destroy my family because your own marriage is falling apart. You are deeply sick. The performance was flawless. They had practiced this toxic dynamic my entire life. Whenever I spoke the absolute truth, they painted me as the angry, unstable black woman ruining the peace. Preston still had not said a single word. He gently patted Tasha, shaking shoulder, but his ice-blue eyes were locked directly on me. He was analyzing the crumpled receipt on the table, then looking sharply at Marcus, sweating forehead. Preston was no fool. He saw the raw fear radiating off my husband, but he kept his mouth tightly shut, playing his cards incredibly close to his chest. You need to leave right now, Valerie demanded, pointing a shaking finger toward the grand mahogany double doors. You are ruining this beautiful meal, and you are blatantly disrespecting Preston in his own home. Get out. Kiara, I will not tolerate this toxic behavior around my precious family. I picked up my clutch, preparing to walk out with my dignity completely intact. Suddenly, the heavy dining chair next to me scraped loudly against the marble floor. Julian stood up slowly, towering impressively over his younger brother. He buttoned his tailored suit jacket, a look of absolute disgust permanently etched on his face. You always were a terrible liar, Marcus, Julian said, his deep voice easily cutting through. Tasha, fake sobbing. Your taste in jewelry is almost as trashy as your taste in women. Julian did not wait for a single response. He did not bother looking at my mother or Tasha. He simply placed a firm protective hand on the small of my back and guided me away from the chaotic table. We walked out of the grand dining room together, leaving the entire family sitting in stunned, suffocating silence. The heavy oak door slammed shut behind us, cutting off the chaotic sounds of my family scrambling to process what just happened. We walked out into the cool Georgia night air. Neither of us said a single word until we reached his sleek black sedan parked at the edge of the circular driveway. Julian unlocked the doors, and we slipped inside the leather interior, insulating us from the toxic estate we just escaped. He did not start the engine. Instead, he immediately flipped open his laptop, the bright screen illuminating his sharp features in the dark car. I need you to look at this right now, Kiara, Julian said, his voice dropping its previous sarcasm and adopting a deadly serious tone. He turned the screen toward me. I stared at a complex web of financial routing numbers, corporate accounts, and routing schedules. It looked like a foreign language, but Julian highlighted a specific PDF document in the center of the screen. This is a commercial loan application. Marcus submitted it 3 days ago to a private lending firm that my venture capital group occasionally monitors. Look at the applicant name. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the digital document. The applicant was my primary staging company, Kiara Staging Solutions, LLC. The loan amount requested was a staggering $5 million. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page and felt the blood run cold in my veins. There, on the final signature line, was my name, perfectly signed. My handwriting had been masterfully forged. Marcus had access to my old physical contracts and had clearly traced my signature to bypass the digital verification process. He is using my business to steal $5 million. I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the massive betrayal. Julian nodded grimly, tapping the keyboard to bring up a banking countdown timer. It is worse than just a simple theft. Marcus knows exactly how the commercial lending laws work in this state. The bank has already given preliminary approval based on his status as an investment banker and his fraudulent presentation of your company assets. The loan is scheduled to be fully processed and dispersed in exactly 72 hours. Once those funds hit the routing account, you will be held federally liable for the entire debt. The government will not care that you did not sign the paperwork. They will look at the marital assets and the corporate registration and hold you responsible for every single cent. I sat back against the leather seat trying to process the sheer scale of my husband and his manipulation. Why would he risk federal wire fraud just to get cash, I asked, knowing Marcus was usually too cowardly to risk actual prison time. Julian brought up another screen showing offshore banking accounts. Because he does not plan to stick around, Julian explained, pointing to a newly opened account in the Cayman Islands. He has structured this loan to disperse directly into a holding account that he controls. The moment the $5 million drops, he plans to transfer it completely offshore and immediately default on the commercial loan. He is going to leave you holding a $5 million bag while he and Tasha use the stolen cash to fund their secret getaway accounts. I checked the travel logs. Tasha has a one-way first-class ticket to the Caribbean booked for next week. She told Preston she was going on a luxury influencer brand trip. She is planning to meet Marcus there with your money. My own husband and my own sister were planning to destroy my financial future to fund their affair. They thought I was just a naive black woman who only knew how to arrange decorative pillows and hang expensive curtains. They thought I would crumble under the weight of a federal investigation and beg my mother for help, which would ultimately force me to surrender whatever dignity I had left. I looked at the glowing laptop screen showing the 72-hour countdown. I did not panic, I did not cry, I did not hyperventilate. Instead, a slow, genuine smirk spread across my face. I reached over and gently closed Julian's laptop. The soft click echoed in the quiet car. You can stop the countdown, Julian, I said, leaning back and crossing my arms. Let the bank process the loan. Let them disperse the $5 million. Julian stared at me, his sharp eyes narrowing in confusion. Kiara, if you let that money drop, you are committing financial suicide. Marcus will vanish, and the feds will seize everything you own. They will take your staging warehouse, your inventory, your business bank accounts. They will liquidate your entire life. I laughed, a cold, hard sound that felt incredibly liberating. Let them seize the staging company. Julian, I said, looking him dead in the eye. Kiara, Staging Solutions, LLC, is nothing but a hollow shell. It has absolutely zero real assets attached to it. Julian paused, his hands hovering over the closed laptop. What are you talking about? I have been married to an investment banker for 5 years. I explained, my voice filled with calm authority. Did he really think I would not learn a few tricks about asset protection? That staging company only holds depreciating assets like used velvet couches and cheap decorative lamps. Last year, I quietly hired a boutique corporate law firm in Delaware. I transferred every single piece of commercial real estate I secretly own, all the buildings, all the warehouses, all the appreciating assets, into a highly protected blind trust. My name is nowhere on the public deeds. The LLC. Marcus just used to secure a $5 million loan is worth roughly $40,000 in used furniture. He just committed federal bank fraud by inflating the assets of a ghost company. Julian stared at me in absolute stunned silence. A slow, impressed smile broke across his handsome face. He shook his head, letting out a low chuckle. You let him think he was the financial genius while you built a fortress right under his nose. Kiara, you are absolutely terrifying, and I have never respected anyone more. The realization that Marcus had walked straight into his own federal prison sentence hung beautifully in the air. He thought he was trapping me, but he had just signed his own arrest warrant. The bank would disperse the funds, discover the staging company was worthless, and immediately involve the FBI for commercial lending fraud. Julian opened his laptop again, a new energy driving his movements. Let us look closer at this loan application, he said quickly, pulling up the guarantor section. If Marcus inflated your company assets to secure $5 million, the bank would still require a secondary guarantor with massive liquid assets to underwrite the risk. Marcus does not have that kind of liquid cash. He is leveraged up to his neck in bad investments. Let us see who he used as the fall guy for the secondary guarantee. Julian clicked on the final page of the PDF, examining the digital signatures. His impressed smile instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer disbelief. He turned the laptop screen back toward me, his eyes wide. Kiara. Look at this, Julian said, his voice dropping low. I leaned in and read the name printed clearly on the secondary guarantor line. It was not a fake corporate entity. It was not a forged business associate. It was a very real, very wealthy individual who had pledged her own assets to secure the fraudulent loan. The name on the line was Tasha. Marcus did not forge her signature, Julian said, tracing the digital verification stamp. Tasha willingly signed this. She legally pledged all of the assets she controls through her marriage to Preston to guarantee the $5 million. If the loan defaults, the bank will not just go after your empty shell company. They are legally entitled to seize Preston bank accounts because Tasha tied them to this fraud. My sister had not just agreed to run away with my husband. She had legally handed her billionaire husband entire fortune over to the federal government. I stepped out of Julian's sleek sedan the following morning, feeling a strange sense of absolute clarity. The crisp Atlanta air hit my face as I walked into my favorite upscale coffee shop. I ordered my usual espresso, handing my sleek black debit card to the barista. I was ready to finalize the staging for a massive Buckhead estate. The barista swiped. The card frowned and swiped it again. I am sorry, Mom, it says declined, he murmured. I pulled out my backup credit card from our joint account. Declined again. I stepped aside, opening my mobile banking app on my phone. Every single account connected to Marcus showed a blazing red locked symbol. He had used his executive privileges at the investment bank to illegally freeze my personal and joint accounts. He wanted to starve me out to remind me who held the financial power in our marriage. A notification popped up. A voicemail from Marcus left 10 minutes ago. I pressed play. Good morning, Kiara. Marcus' smooth, arrogant voice filled the speaker. I noticed you tried to buy coffee. I froze the accounts to protect our assets while you are having this little mental breakdown of yours. What you did at dinner last night was completely unacceptable. You embarrassed me and you deeply disrespected your mother and sister. Tasha is devastated. I will unfreeze your cards the second you march over to Preston Estate and formally apologize to both of them. Until then, consider this a timeout. Grow up, Kiara. The audacity of this man was staggering. He was sleeping with my sister, forging my signature on a $5 million commercial loan, and treating me like a misbehaving child throwing a tantrum. He thought I was trapped with zero liquid cash. He had no idea Julian had already helped me open an untraceable offshore account linked strictly to my blind trust. I walked out of the coffee shop. Julian pulled up to the curb perfectly on time. Get in, Julian commanded, his eyes scanning the street. We have a meeting. I slid into the passenger seat and we drove to a secure, unmarked office building downtown. We walked into a windowless room where a tall, broad-shouldered man was waiting. This is Damon, Julian said, dropping his briefcase on the table. He is the best private investigator in Atlanta and he works exclusively for me. Damon nodded, sliding a heavy encrypted laptop across the polished table. We retrieved the micro camera you placed inside the St. Regis air vent. Damon said, tapping the keyboard. The audio enhancement is finished. You need to see this, Kiara. He hit play. The 4K video filled the screen showing the luxurious penthouse suite. I watched my husband and my sister lying in the tangled silk sheets, drinking the expensive champagne I had contaminated with my wedding ring. The visual was disgusting, but the audio was gold. Tasha was resting her head on Marcus' chest, tracing circles on his skin. Preston is getting suspicious about the missing capital. Tasha whispered, her voice echoing crystal clear through the speakers. I transferred another 200,000 yesterday to cover your margin calls, Marcus. How much more do you need to save your portfolio? Marcus sighed, wrapping his arm around her. I need at least 4 million to stop the SEC from auditing my division. But do not worry, baby. I forged Kiara's signature on a commercial loan application yesterday. The bank will approve it in 3 days. Once it clears, we can let Kiara take the fall for the federal fraud, and we will be sitting on a beach in the Caribbean. They were not just having a sloppy affair. They were actively conspiring to commit massive corporate embezzlement using Preston Tech fortune to artificially inflate Marcus' failing investment portfolio while simultaneously setting me up to take the fall for federal bank fraud. Tasha had zero loyalty to anyone but herself. She was bleeding her billionaire husband dry to fund a fantasy with a broke investment banker. I stared at the screen, feeling an icy wave of total validation wash over me. I had all the ammunition required to completely annihilate them. I thanked Damon, grabbed my purse, and told Julian I had a property staging to finish at the Buckhead Mansion. I needed to maintain the illusion of my normal working routine. I arrived at the sprawling vacant estate, directing my moving team to arrange the heavy velvet sofas and gold-accented mirrors. The physical labor always centered my mind. I was adjusting a heavy crystal vase on the dining table when the front door swung open. My mother Valerie marched into the grand foyer, her designer heels clicking sharply against the imported marble. She wore a furious expression, gripping her expensive handbag like a weapon. "Dismiss your workers right now," Valerie demanded, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at me. "We are going to have a serious conversation." I signaled my crew to take an early lunch break. They quietly exited, leaving me alone with the woman who had spent my entire life trying to shrink me to fit her narrow narrative. "You are acting like a lunatic, Kiara," Valerie spat, stepping directly into my personal space. "I know Marcus froze your accounts. He called me this morning. He is doing what a strong husband should do when his wife loses her mind. Listen to me very carefully. You are going to go home, beg your husband for forgiveness, and then you are going to call Tasha and apologize for your disgusting accusations last night. If you even think about filing for a divorce and causing a public scandal before her vow renewal ceremony, I will personally destroy you. I will have you permanently blacklisted from the Jack and Jill chapter, the Alpha Kappa Alpha Alumni Network, and every elite Black social circle in Atlanta. You will never stage another luxury house in this city again. Do you understand me?" I understood her perfectly. My mother was willing to sacrifice my financial security to maintain her country club status and protect her golden child. I looked at Valerie. Her face twisted in rage, and simply smiled. I pulled out my phone, dialing the building's security desk. "I need an escort for a trespasser," I said, my voice deadpan. "She is wearing a hideous pink blazer and screaming in the main foyer." Valerie gasped, her jaw dropping in shock. "You would not dare," she hissed. I stepped past her, heading toward the grand staircase. "Watch your step on the way out, mother," I called over my shoulder. "The marble floors are slippery when you are losing your grip on reality." I did not have time to entertain her delusions. Julian had arranged a reservation for me at a highly discreet cigar lounge in Midtown. It was the kind of establishment where billionaires conducted hostile takeovers over rare scotch. I sat in a secluded leather booth, waiting patiently. Exactly at 8 o'clock, Preston walked through the heavy, mahogany doors. He looked completely out of place, yet entirely in control. He was a ruthless white tech executive who treated every interaction like a corporate merger. Tasha married him for his unlimited black cards, and he married her because a beautiful influencer wife looked fantastic for company public relations. But Preston was not a fool. He slid into the booth opposite me, unbuttoning his tailored suit jacket. He ordered a bourbon, neat and lit a premium cigar, taking a slow, deliberate drag. "You said it was an emergency concerning my wife." "Kiara," Preston said, his ice blue eyes locking onto mine. "I do not like riddles. Tell me why my security team logged Marcus trying to access my secondary routing numbers this morning." I did not bother with small talk. I reached into my bag and pulled out the encrypted tablet Julian had prepared. I slid it straight across the polished wooden table. I tapped the screen once, and Preston looked down. The high-definition footage from the St. Regis penthouse began to play. He watched his manicured wife entangled in the silk sheets with my husband. He heard Marcus boasting about forging my signature on a $5 million commercial loan. More importantly, Preston heard the exact moment Tasha confessed to funneling his money to cover Marcus' failing investment portfolio. I sat perfectly still, waiting for the explosion. I expected him to shout, to call his corporate lawyers, and demand Tasha be removed from his estate. But Preston did none of those things. His reaction was far more terrifying than any loud outburst could ever be. He watched the entire video with a chilling, absolute calmness. The ambient noise of the cigar lounge seemed to fade away. Preston did not blink. His breathing did not change. He reached the end of the video, tapped the screen to pause it, and stared at the frozen image of Tasha and Marcus laughing. Preston took the expensive cigar from between his lips. With one swift, brutal motion, he snapped the thick cigar completely in half. Tobacco leaves spilled onto the polished table. He picked up the tablet, turned it off, and casually slid it into his inner suit pocket. "Thank you, Kiara," Preston said, his voice dangerously soft and void of emotion. "You have saved me a tremendous amount of legal maneuvering in my upcoming quarter." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. "Julian has the loan documents." "Preston," I said, keeping my tone strictly business. "Tasha signed as the secondary guarantor on Marcus' fraudulent $5 million bank loan. She legally pledged your marital assets to back his corporate theft. I am going to the federal authorities tomorrow. Marcus will be arrested for wire fraud, and Tasha will be indicted as his co-conspirator." Preston held up his hand, stopping me instantly. "You are not going to the police tomorrow, Kiara," he commanded. "If you trigger a federal investigation right now, the SEC will freeze all connected accounts, including mine, while they sort out the mess. I have a major tech acquisition launching next week, and I refuse to let your idiot husband and my deceitful wife disrupt my stock prices." "Then what do you propose?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "I am not letting them get away with this for another second." Preston leaned closer, a dark, calculated smirk playing on his lips. "Tasha has been obsessing over this lavish vow renewal ceremony for 6 months," Preston said. "She wants to show the entire city of Atlanta how perfect her high society marriage is. She invited my investors, the mayor, and all of your mother, pretentious socialite friends. We are going to let her have her big day. Kiara, I want you to hold off on the police reports until the night of the event. We are going to publicly dismantle them in front of every single person they are trying to impress. They want a show. We will give them a spectacular execution." I looked at the cold calculation in his eyes and recognized a predator who had just found his prey. It was an unholy alliance, but our goals aligned perfectly. I nodded once, sealing the pact. "We do it your way, Preston. But I want Marcus destroyed." "Consider him already dead," Preston replied. He pulled his smartphone from his pocket. His fingers moved rapidly across the screen, opening his banking administration portal. "Let us give them a small preview of the main event," he muttered quietly. I watched as Preston systematically selected every single credit card, debit card, and checking account attached to Tasha's name. With one decisive tap, he hit the cancel button, flagging them all for massive fraudulent activity. Right on cue. Exactly 30 seconds later, my own cell phone buzzed loudly on the dark wooden table. It was Marcus calling me in a state of total panic. The glorious financial starvation had finally officially begun. The annual Atlanta Heritage Charity Golf Tournament was the completely undisputed crown jewel of African American high society. Everyone who was anyone in the city corporate landscape was sipping mint juleps on the perfectly manicured green lawns. I arrived wearing an emerald green pantsuit that commanded absolute attention the moment I stepped onto the terrace. Marcus was standing near the 18th hole, surrounded by the senior partners from his investment bank. He was holding a scotch and laughing loudly as he tried to secure his position within the firm. I walked purposefully toward the catering pavilion, keeping my posture perfectly straight. Marcus spotted me, and his arrogant smile twisted into a malicious sneer. He immediately raised his voice, making sure every wealthy banker nearby could hear him. "Look who decided to show up," Marcus announced, gesturing toward me with his glass. "Gentlemen, please excuse my wife. She has been experiencing a severe mental breakdown lately. You know how it is when a woman cannot handle the pressure of supporting a successful husband. Her little furniture business is failing, and the stress has made her completely delusional." He chuckled, expecting his colleagues to join in his misogynistic joke. He wanted to publicly brand me as the crazy black woman to invalidate any future claims I made against him. The senior partners shifted uncomfortably, holding their expensive golf clubs. Before Marcus could spew another incredibly toxic lie, a tall shadow fell across the bright sunlit green. Julian stepped right in front of the murmuring crowd, his tailored gray suit immaculate and his physical presence absolutely dominating. He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope, slapping it directly against Marcus' chest, with enough force to make Marcus stumble backward. "What is this?" Marcus stammered, his confident facade instantly cracking. "This is a formal legal cease and desist order," Julian declared, his deep voice echoing across the silent putting green. "You are hereby legally barred from representing, attempting to leverage, or falsely inflating the assets of Kiara Staging Solutions. I am serving you right here in front of your senior partners because your firm needs to know that you are currently under investigation for corporate financial misconduct." The senior partners gasped collectively, stepping away from Marcus as if he had a contagious disease. "You are committing career suicide." Marcus Julian continued, smoothly adjusting his watch. "Do not ever speak about my client or her mental state again unless you want to add defamation to your rapidly growing list of federal offenses." Marcus stood paralyzed, clutching the legal documents, his face flushing a humiliating shade of purple, in front of the exact men who controlled his entire career trajectory. While Marcus was being professionally slaughtered on the golf green, a different kind of disaster was unfolding inside the lavish catering tent. I walked over just in time to see Tasha standing at the payment register, wearing a ridiculous oversized sun hat and a designer tennis skirt. She was loudly attempting to pay the absolute massive $10,000 catering bill for the country club upcoming charity luncheon. The club manager, a stern older woman, ran Tasha's sleek black card through the machine. It beeped loudly, flashing a bright red error message. "I am sorry, Mom," the manager said politely but firmly. "Your card has been declined. Do you have another form of payment?" Tasha scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "That is impossible. Run it again. My husband is a tech billionaire. The machine must be broken." The manager ran it again, resulting in the same obnoxious rejection beep. Tasha's face turned crimson. She began screaming at the staff member, throwing a massive tantrum demanding they respect her status. Valerie rushed over, her face tight with sheer panic, as nearby socialites began whispering and pointing. "Tasha, stop making a scene," Valerie hissed, pulling out her own credit card. "I will cover it." Valerie slid her card into the machine, holding her chin high to maintain her precious respectability politics. A second later, the machine rejected her card too. Valerie gasped, staring at the screen in absolute horror. Preston had not just cut off Tasha. He had severed the financial umbilical cord Tasha used to fund our mother lifestyle. The elite country club members watched in utter disgust as the supposed wealthy golden child and her status-obsessed mother stood completely dead broke at the register, unable to pay for a simple catered lunch. Marcus practically sprinted inside into the luxurious mahogany clubhouse, desperately needing an escape from his public execution on the golf course. I followed quietly, watching from the shadowed hallway as he collapsed into a leather armchair, pulling out his laptop. He was sweating profusely, his hands shaking as he typed. He needed to close a massive commercial real estate lease today. A major international retailer wanted to rent a prime block of downtown Atlanta property, and Marcus desperately needed the commission bonus from that deal to save his failing investment portfolio and hire a criminal defense lawyer. I watched him refresh his email inbox over and over, praying desperately for the final approval from the anonymous building owner. My phone buzzed in my pocket, signaling a new message. I opened my secure Blind Trust email portal and hit send on the drafted document. Marcus' laptop chimed loudly. He eagerly opened the new email, his eyes scanning the screen. I watched the exact moment his entire world shattered. His shoulders slumped, his mouth fell open, and the remaining color drained completely from his face. The property owner had officially rejected the lease, ending Marcus' final hope of a financial rescue. But the rejection was not what made him stop breathing. He stared at the electronic signature at the bottom of the highly confidential legal document, realizing for the very first time who actually owned the most expensive commercial real estate block in the entire city. The bold, digital signature on the devastating rejection letter simply read Kiara. Marcus fled the country club like a man running from a burning building. By the time he slammed his expensive car into park outside my massive staging warehouse, his tailored suit was soaked with sweat. He shoved past my manager and burst through the heavy industrial doors. His wild eyes darted around the cavernous space filled with luxury furniture until they locked onto me. I was standing near the center aisle, holding a clipboard directing my moving crew on how to load a custom velvet sectional into our delivery truck. "How do you own it?" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking loudly as it echoed off the high metal ceilings. "How the hell do you own the most expensive commercial block in downtown Atlanta, Kiara? Answer me right now. You are just a glorified decorator. You do not have the financial backing for an acquisition of that magnitude." I did not even blink at his outburst. I simply checked off an item on my clipboard and pointed toward a massive mahogany dining table. "Hey guys," I called out, completely ignoring the sweating man screaming in my face. "Wrap the corners tightly before you load it. We have a high-end client expecting absolute perfection tomorrow morning. Do not scratch the finish." Marcus' face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. He marched across the concrete floor, his dress shoes slapping loudly. He positioned himself directly in my line of sight, breathing heavily like a cornered beast. "You are going to look at me when I am talking to you, Kiara," he demanded, slapping his hand down violently on a nearby glass coffee table. "Where did you get the millions to buy that building? You have been moving cheap couches for 5 years. You do not have hidden capital like that. It makes zero sense." I handed my clipboard to my foreman and finally looked Marcus directly in the eye. "I have been moving couches to make other people look wealthy," I replied, my voice perfectly calm and dripping with absolute authority. "You were just too busy trying to impress your elite banking friends to notice I was quietly buying the very properties I was staging. Now, if you do not mind, I have a lucrative business to run, and your pathetic tantrum is blocking my loading lane." "You stole it!" Marcus yelled, pointing a shaking finger right at my face. "That is the only logical explanation. You funneled money out of my private investment accounts and used it to buy commercial real estate behind my back. I am calling the Atlanta police right now. I am calling the federal authorities and telling them my wife embezzled millions from my firm to fund her secret trusts. They will seize that entire building by the end of the week and put you in a federal prison cell." His desperation was pathetic. He was projecting his own exact financial crimes onto me, hoping to create a loud enough distraction to save his failing career. He glanced around the warehouse and spotted my silver laptop sitting open on a drafting table across the aisle. His eyes lit up with malicious intent. He lunged forward, reaching out aggressively to grab my computer, screaming that he was going to download all of my restricted financial records to prove his ridiculous fabricated allegations. He never made it halfway. A massive hand clamped down on Marcus' wrist with the crushing force of a steel vice. Julian stepped out from the deep shadows of the inventory racks where he had been quietly reviewing our trust documents. He did not say a single word as he forcefully twisted Marcus' arm sharply up behind his back. Marcus let out a loud, pathetic yelp of sudden extreme pain, dropping heavily to his knees on the hard concrete floor. Julian kept the joint pressure locked tightly in place, using his other muscular hand to grab the collar of Marcus' expensive suit jacket. He hauled his younger brother forcefully back to his feet, like he weighed absolutely nothing. Julian physically marched him backward through the staging warehouse, dragging him directly past my stunned moving crew. Marcus struggled and cursed loudly, but he was completely powerless against Julian and his unyielding grip. Julian kicked open the heavy metal loading dock doors and violently shoved Marcus out into the wet gravel parking lot. Marcus stumbled over his own feet and fell hard, scraping his hands against the sharp rocks. He scrambled to his knees, looking up at his older brother with absolute terror. "Let me make this perfectly clear," Julian said, his deep voice carrying a lethal promise. "You will not call the police. You will not call the feds. And if you ever attempt to physically lunge at Kiara again, you will leave in a body bag. Do not ever step foot near her business again." Julian slammed the heavy metal doors shut. Later that exact same evening, the city was blanketed in a heavy torrential rain. Tasha pulled her luxury SUV into a dimly lit underground parking garage in Buckhead. She parked in the darkest corner, unaware of the blacked-out surveillance van sitting quietly 2 spaces away. Inside that van, Damon, my hired private investigator, adjusted his high-definition night vision lens and hit record. Marcus stepped out from behind a thick concrete pillar, slipping quickly into the passenger seat of Tasha's vehicle. The advanced audio equipment picked up their frantic, hushed conversation with crystal clarity. "Preston cut off all my credit cards," Tasha cried, hitting the leather steering wheel in frustration. "He knows something, Marcus. We are completely out of money, and Kiara just rejected your lease. We are ruined. What are we going to do?" Marcus gripped his hair, pacing, his breathing heavy and erratic. "We have to destroy her trusts," he muttered frantically. "If she gets indicted for corporate fraud, the federal government will freeze all her commercial properties and invalidate her legal standing. We will plant fake corporate espionage emails tonight." Their desperate plan was put into motion before the sun even rose. The next morning, I was sitting at my kitchen island drinking black coffee and reviewing the final staging layouts for a massive Buckhead estate when a loud, aggressive pounding echoed through my front door. I checked the security cameras on my phone and saw 2 uniformed Atlanta police officers standing on my porch alongside a man in a rumpled brown suit. I smoothed down my silk robe, unlocked the deadbolt, and pulled the door open. The man in the suit flashed a tarnished badge, introducing himself as Detective Bronson. He did not ask politely. He demanded I accompany him to the precinct immediately regarding suspicious financial transfers linked to my staging company. I knew exactly who had sent him. Marcus was playing his absolute last card, attempting to use intimidation by law enforcement to break my resolve. I did not panic. I simply asked for 5 minutes to change into appropriate clothing. I put on a sharp, tailored navy blazer and matching trousers, projecting absolute authority. While tying my shoes, I sent a single text message to Julian. They made their move. Precinct 4. The interrogation room was deliberately designed to be psychologically oppressive. The walls were painted a sickly institutional gray and the air conditioning was cranked up to freezing temperatures. I sat at a scratched metal table with my posture perfectly straight, resting my manicured hands smoothly on the surface. Detective Bronson paced around the small room, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. He slammed a thick stack of printed emails down in front of me. These were the fake corporate espionage emails Marcus and Tasha had planted overnight, perfectly forged, to look like I was illegally transferring massive sums of capital from Marcus Investment Bank into my staging company. Bronson leaned over the table, invading my personal space. His breath smelled strongly of stale coffee and cheap cigarettes. "We have the digital paper trail." "Kiara," he barked, his voice harsh and demanding, "we know you used your husband's executive passwords to embezzle millions into your little furniture business. If you sign this confession right now, acknowledging you stole the funds due to marital distress, I can promise the judge will go easy on you. If you refuse, I am locking you in a holding cell and charging you with grand larceny by the end of the hour." I looked at the printed confession letter resting next to the fabricated emails. Marcus had actually typed it out himself. The phrasing was full of his signature, arrogant vocabulary, framing me as a hysterical, desperate woman who stole money because she was jealous of her sister. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to force me to surrender my assets. I looked up at Detective Bronson, completely unbothered by his loud threats. "I am not signing a single piece of paper, Detective," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And you are not going to arrest me because you do not have a legitimate warrant for my detainment. You brought me in here on a favor for an investment banker who is currently drowning in massive debt." Before Bronson could scream another threat, the heavy metal door of the interrogation room was violently kicked open. Julian strode into the room, moving with the lethal grace of a predator who had just cornered his prey. He bypassed Bronson completely, walking straight to the metal table and slamming his heavy brass Georgia bar credential directly onto the scratched surface. "I am Julian, representing this woman," he declared, his deep voice radiating absolute authority. "You have exactly 10 seconds to explain why my client is being held in this room without legal representation or a valid arrest warrant before I file a federal civil rights lawsuit against this entire precinct for police harassment and unlawful detainment." Bronson stumbled backward, visibly shaken by Julian. Sudden commanding presence, he tried to point at the fake emails stuttering about financial irregularities. Julian did not even let him finish. He pulled the thick, ironclad blind trust documents from his briefcase. He tossed them onto the table, scattering Marcus' fake evidence. "These legal documents prove my client has zero financial ties to her husband's investment firm," Julian stated sharply, pointing at the federal seals. "It is financially and legally impossible for her to have embezzled those funds. The emails you are holding are completely forged, but we both already know that. Do we not, Detective Bronson?" Bronson swallowed hard, sweating profusely. Julian reached back into his briefcase and pulled out one final red folder. He slid it slowly across the metal table, tapping the cover. "I have spent the last 3 hours digging into your personal offshore accounts," Detective Julian said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It is amazing how much money a corrupt cop can hide, but it is even more amazing that the routing numbers matching the deposits in your account link directly back to Marcus' private banking portal. You took a $50,000 bribe from my brother to harass an innocent black woman." Bronson's face drained of all color. He looked at the banking proof, realizing his entire career and freedom were instantaneously over. "You are free to go." "Ma'am," Bronson choked out, refusing to meet my eyes. "The investigation is officially closed." We walked out of the interrogation room and stepped into the bustling precinct lobby. Marcus was sitting on a plastic waiting chair, looking smug and expectant. When he saw me walking freely alongside Julian, his arrogant smile completely vanished. Bronson stormed out of the holding area right behind us, his face red with sheer panic and rage. He marched directly up to Marcus, grabbed him violently by the lapels of his expensive suit, and physically dragged him toward the precinct exit. "Do not call me again," Bronson roared, shoving Marcus through the glass doors. "Keep your family drama away before I arrest you for bribery." While Marcus was facing the absolute destruction of his backup plan, Tasha was completely consumed by her own delusional reality. She threw herself entirely into planning her lavish vow renewal, ignoring the massive red flags popping up all around her. When Preston quietly canceled her unlimited black cards, Tasha did not pause her reckless spending spree. She simply instructed the luxury vendors to bypass her personal accounts and send the massive invoices directly to Preston corporate headquarters. She was desperately trying to project the image of a flawless high society marriage, masking the fact that her secret lover was currently spiraling into a legal and financial abyss. She thought Preston was just busy with a major tech merger, completely oblivious to the fact that he was meticulously documenting every single fraudulent invoice she forwarded to his accounting department. Tasha was treating her vow renewal like a royal coronation, completely blind to the guillotine waiting for her at the altar. The sheer arrogance of my family knew absolutely no bounds. The very next afternoon, my mother Valerie showed up unannounced at my private apartment building. She bypassed the concierge entirely, tailgating another resident into the secure elevator. When I opened my door, she barged inside, carrying a designer handbag and an expression of profound disappointment. She did not ask how I was doing. She did not ask if the rumors about Marcus being dragged out of a police precinct were true. Instead, she slammed her handbag onto my kitchen counter and launched right into her toxic lecture. "Kiara, you are making a massive fool of yourself," Valerie scolded, pacing across my hardwood floors. "I heard you are refusing to take Marcus calls. You need to stop this ridiculous tantrum right now and go back to your husband. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is for me to attend my sorority luncheons while my eldest daughter is actively threatening a scandalous divorce? You are ruining my reputation with the elite alumni networks. You need to be more like Tasha. Look at her perfect marriage. Preston treats her like absolute royalty, and she knows exactly how to keep a successful, wealthy man happy." I stood alone in my kitchen sipping a glass of sparkling water, letting her dig her own grave with every single word. She was praising a woman who was currently stealing from her billionaire husband to fund a cheap affair with my broke husband. It was the ultimate tragic comedy. Valerie crossed her arms, glaring at me with sheer contempt. "Tasha, vow renewal is in exactly 4 days," Valerie commanded. "I expect you to be there with a smile on your face." In fact, I told Tasha you would handle all the floral arrangements for the grand ballroom completely free of charge. It is the least you can do to support your sister while your own life is falling apart. I want massive white roses draped across every table. I want the entire room to look like a fairy tale. Do not embarrass us by being difficult." I looked at my mother, seeing the desperate, status-obsessed woman she truly was. She cared more about her country club friends, seeing a perfect family, than she cared about my actual happiness. I did not argue. I did not show a single ounce of anger. I set my glass down and offered her a bright, pristine smile. "I would love to handle the floral arrangements, Mother," I said, my voice dripping with honeyed compliance. "I will personally ensure the ballroom looks absolutely unforgettable. I will make sure the flowers match the exact mood of the evening," I promised, knowing full well the mood would be absolute devastation and ruin. Valerie visibly relaxed her posture, softening as she patted my cheek. "That is a good, obedient daughter," she murmured, completely unaware that my obedience was actually the final nail in her coffin. She turned and walked out of my apartment, leaving me alone to finish planning the destruction of her precious social standing. 2 nights later, the rain was pouring down in heavy sheets across the Atlanta skyline. I sat in a dimly lit private booth at the back of an exclusive speakeasy, sliding a thick manila folder across the dark mahogany table. Preston was sitting opposite me, nursing a glass of expensive scotch. He opened the thick folder reviewing the final seating chart and the precise audiovisual cues we had established for the upcoming vow renewal ceremony. "The towering floral arrangements will block the view of the side exits," I explained, pointing to the detailed blueprint of the estate ballroom. "Marcus will be seated at table 4, right in the center of the room, surrounded by your corporate investors. He will have absolutely nowhere to run when the video hits the projection screens. My staging crew has already rigged the main doors to lock automatically once the presentation begins." Preston nodded, his icy blue eyes scanning the strategic layout. "It is flawless, Kiara," he said, taking a slow sip of his drink. "The technical team is fully paid off. The massive digital screens will drop from the ceiling. The exact moment I take the microphone to give my speech, I have instructed the audio engineers to route the sound directly through the main concert speakers. Everyone in that room will hear every single word they said. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a crisp legal document, sliding it smoothly across the table toward me. I looked down at the heavy premium paper. The official seal of the Fulton County Superior Court glowed brightly under the dim speakeasy lights. It was a finalized divorce petition, citing irreconcilable differences and massive financial fraud. The signature line at the bottom was already signed in bold black ink. Preston finished his scotch and looked me dead in the eye. "I file this with the judge at exactly 9 o'clock Monday morning," Preston stated, his voice completely devoid of all emotion. "But before I officially end my marriage, we are going to completely burn this entire city to the ground." The night of the vow renewal arrived with a suffocating level of extravagance. Tasha rented a historic estate in Buckhead, transforming the sprawling grounds into a ridiculous display of artificial perfection. Hundreds of elite guests poured through the mahogany doors. The women wore custom silk gowns, and the men sported tailored tuxedos. Everyone played the respectability game, desperately trying to prove their immense wealth. I stood quietly near a towering ice sculpture, watching the absolute circus unfold. Tasha made her grand entrance, floating down the sweeping marble staircase like she was genuine royalty. She wore an absurdly expensive white gown trailing heavily behind her. Her neck and wrists were dripping in massive diamonds. She smiled radiantly at the flashing cameras, convinced that Preston purchased those flawless stones to celebrate their love. She had no idea that Preston canceled every single one of her credit cards days ago. The diamonds around her neck were rented, and Preston had scheduled the security team to confiscate them when the night ended. I looked across the crowded ballroom and made brief eye contact with Preston. He stood near the altar, looking like an icy executioner in his black tuxedo. He raised his glass to me, a silent acknowledgement of the finalized divorce petition sitting safely in his pocket. I walked away toward the champagne fountain flowing into crystal flutes. I reached for a glass, but a hand slammed down on the marble counter next to my fingers. I did not even have to look up to know the repulsive scent of Marcus's expensive cologne. He cornered me against the catering table, blocking my path with his broad shoulders. He wore a sickeningly smug smirk, looking down at me with contempt. "You clean up nicely for a woman who is about to lose her entire mind," Marcus whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "I hope you enjoy this fancy champagne, Kiara, because it is the last taste of luxury you are going to have for a long time." I slowly picked up my glass, taking a calm sip. "Are you still upset about the golf course, Marcus?" I asked, my tone perfectly bored. He leaned in closer, his eyes flashing with desperate malice. "You think you are so smart hiding your little assets, but you are playing checkers while I am playing chess," Marcus sneered. "I filed emergency psychiatric evaluation papers with the Fulton County Court this morning. I told the judge my wife is suffering from severe delusions and aggressive paranoia. I brought copies of your little outburst at the family dinner as proof. The judge will grant me full medical conservatorship over you by Monday. I am going to have you committed to a psychiatric facility, Kiara. Once you are locked away in a padded room, I will have total legal control over every single bank account, shell company, and piece of furniture you own." "You thought you could outsmart an investment banker, but you just handed me the keys to your entire life." I stared at the man I married, listening to him gleefully describe how he planned to strip away my fundamental human rights to steal my money. He was weaponizing the legal system to cage a black woman just to fund his affair with my sister. Before I could deliver my response, a strong protective arm wrapped securely around my waist, pulling me flush against a solid chest. Julian materialized out of the bustling crowd, his physical presence instantly shrinking Marcus down to size. Julian wore a midnight blue velvet tuxedo that made him look like absolute royalty. He looked down at his younger brother with a mixture of pity and sheer disgust. "You are not going to control anything except a prison cafeteria tray, Marcus," Julian said, his deep voice vibrating with calm authority. Julian did not waste another second on his pathetic brother. He turned his attention to the room, effortlessly spotting the most powerful financial players in Atlanta. Julian raised his free hand, signaling to a group of older, distinguished men standing near the ice sculpture. These were the absolute titans of the city, the commercial developers who controlled billions in real estate. They eagerly walked over to Julian, treating him with immense respect. "Gentlemen," Julian announced, his voice carrying clearly over the gentle string quartet music, "I want to formally introduce you to the woman I have been telling you about. This is Kiara, the sole owner and primary holding director of the entire downtown commercial block you have been aggressively trying to acquire. She holds the exclusive deeds to the most coveted real estate in Atlanta, completely free and clear of any corporate debt." The developers gasped collectively. Their eyes went wide with pure, undisguised reverence as they looked at me. For years, they had been dealing with shell companies and aggressive brokers trying to find out who owned that golden sector of the city. In an instant, I transformed from an invisible staging decorator into the most powerful and important person in the entire ballroom. They immediately crowded around me, offering eager handshakes and pressing premium business cards into my palms. They spoke over each other, practically begging for 10 minutes of my time to pitch their development proposals. I smiled graciously, answering their questions with sharp financial literacy, proving I was a seasoned investor who knew exactly what my empire was worth. I glanced over at Marcus. He stood frozen by the fountain, looking sick and hollow. His jaw hung open, watching the wealthy men he desperately tried to impress, bowing to his wife. Marcus saw his own boss, the ruthless managing partner of his investment bank, rushing through the crowd. Marcus straightened his jacket, plastering on a fake, desperate smile. "Sir, it is great to see you," he said, reaching out. His boss brutally shoved him aside, completely ignoring his outstretched hand. The partner stopped directly in front of me. "Kiara," he pleaded, "I need a meeting on Monday morning right inside my office." I smiled at the managing partner, extending my hand with professional grace. "We can schedule a meeting for Tuesday morning," I told him, my voice carrying over the soft music. "My executive assistant will send you the availability." The powerful man nodded eagerly, completely disregarding Marcus, who was standing right next to us, hyperventilating in panic. Marcus spent his entire career kissing the floor, this partner walked on, and now his boss was begging the wife. Marcus tried to destroy for a real estate meeting. Julian wrapped his arm tighter around my waist, leaning down to whisper in my ear. "The execution is flawless, Kiara," he murmured. Just then, the wedding planner clapped her hands, signaling that the grand vow renewal ceremony was officially beginning. The massive mahogany doors leading to the indoor botanical gardens swung open. The elite guests began filing into the ceremony space, murmuring excitedly about the incredible display of wealth. I walked into the garden with Julian, feeling the heavy stares of the Atlanta elite burning into my back. They were no longer looking at me with pity. I was the owner of the most valuable commercial block in the city, and word traveled fast in these circles. We took our seats near the middle of the aisle, completely bypassing my mother Valerie, who had positioned herself in the center of the front row. Valerie was wearing a ridiculous silver gown that looked more like a wedding dress. She was beaming with toxic pride, turning to the wealthy socialite sitting next to her and loudly boasting about her perfect daughter Tasha. Valerie had no idea that her precious golden child was walking straight into a slaughterhouse. The string quartet shifted their melody, playing a dramatic piece to signal the arrival of the bride. The heavy doors at the back opened, and Tasha made her grand entrance. She wore a custom beaded gown that dragged heavily across the white marble floor. Tasha clutched a massive bouquet, looking down the aisle, with perfectly manufactured tears glistening in her eyes. She was performing for the cameras hired to document her elite influencer status. She walked slowly, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief, acting like a woman deeply overcome by true love. She smiled radiantly at the guests, who sighed and clapped at her performance. Valerie stood up in the front row, clapping her hands together and crying loud, fake tears of joy. The entire scene was a sickening display of artificial perfection. Tasha finally reached the floral altar, stepping up to stand across from Preston. Preston looked like a cold marble statue standing tall in his tuxedo. His face gave away absolutely nothing. He did not reach out to hold her hands. He simply stared at her with those freezing blue eyes, waiting for the music to fade away. The officiant stepped aside, allowing Preston to take the microphone to deliver his custom vows. The entire garden fell into a hushed, expectant silence. Preston held the microphone looking out over the sea of wealthy investors, politicians, and socialites. He took a slow, deliberate breath. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Preston began, his voice echoing deeply through the sound system. "We gather here to celebrate the true meaning of marriage. Marriage is built on a foundation of absolute honesty. It requires unyielding loyalty and a commitment that goes far beyond superficial displays of wealth. We all know that what happens behind closed doors is the true measure of a relationship." Tasha smiled brightly at his words, tilting her head to ensure the photographers caught her best angle. She thought he was praising her devotion. She had zero idea he was literally setting the stage for her public execution. Preston continued pacing slowly across the altar. "Some people believe marriage is simply a transaction, a way to secure resources and elevate social standing. But true loyalty cannot be bought, and betrayal always leaves a digital paper trail." Preston stopped pacing and looked directly at Marcus, who was sweating profusely in the third row. Then Preston turned his piercing gaze back to Tasha. "My wife has shown me exactly what kind of partner she is," Preston announced, his voice dropping an octave. "She has shown me exactly how she values my hard work, my trust, and my bank accounts. And tonight, I want to share the reality of our union with every single one of you." Preston did not wait for Tasha to respond. He raised his left hand and gave a sharp, definitive signal to the audio-visual team stationed in the balcony. The romantic string music instantly cut off, leaving a dead silent vacuum in the garden. Suddenly, the heavy velvet curtains behind the altar dropped away, revealing 3 enormous high-definition projection screens. Tasha turned around, expecting to see a curated slideshow of their luxury vacations. Instead, the screens flickered to life, displaying the crystal-clear footage I had captured from the air vent at the St. Regis Hotel. The video showed the luxurious penthouse suite. Tasha and Marcus were tangled together in the silk sheets, drinking the expensive champagne. The guests gasped in collective shock. The image was undeniable, but the audio was the true weapon of mass destruction. The sound engineer routed the audio directly through the concert-grade speakers, blasting Tasha's voice across the venue. "Preston is getting suspicious about the missing capital," Tasha's voice boomed through the speakers, echoing off the marble walls. "I transferred another 200,000 yesterday to cover your margin calls, Marcus." The entire audience erupted into horrified gasps. Tasha stood frozen at the altar, the color completely draining from her face. The video continued to play, showing Marcus pulling Tasha closer. "I forged Kiara's signature on a commercial loan application yesterday," Marcus' voice echoed loudly, proving his federal crimes to a room full of banking executives. "Once it clears, we can let Kiara take the fall for the fraud, and we will be sitting on a beach in the Caribbean." Valerie let out a blood-curdling shriek from the front row, dropping her designer clutch. The wealthy socialites sitting next to her physically recoiled, pulling their chairs away in sheer disgust. The audio of Tasha explicitly insulting Preston intelligence and plotting to steal his entire fortune blasted into the ears of his corporate investors. Tasha desperately screamed at the audiovisual booth, begging them to turn off the screens, but the technicians had been heavily paid to ignore her. The elite guests stood up, pulling out their cell phones to record the catastrophic destruction of the golden child. The undeniable proof of their sinister financial crimes and their disgusting affair played on a continuous loop, trapping Tasha and Marcus in a nightmare they could never escape. Absolute bedlam consumed the indoor botanical garden. Tasha dropped her massive cascading bouquet of white orchids, letting it hit the marble floor with a dull thud. She grabbed handfuls of her heavy custom-beaded gown, lifting the fabric as she sprinted awkwardly toward the audiovisual booth situated in the balcony. "Turn it off!" she screamed, her voice cracking in pure hysteria, her carefully curated influencer persona completely dissolving. "Turn those screens off right now. I will have you all fired. I will ruin you." The audiovisual technicians did not even flinch. They did not look at the screaming bride tearing her designer dress on the stairs. They looked directly at Preston. Preston stood perfectly still at the floral altar, his face carved from ice. He slowly raised his right hand, revealing a small black master remote control. He pressed a single button. The explicit video of the hotel room instantly vanished from the three massive projection screens. Tasha let out a loud gasp of relief, thinking she had regained control. But her relief lasted for exactly 1 second. The screens flickered back to life, displaying crisp, high-definition banking ledgers. These were not just any bank statements. These were the highly confidential wire transfer logs from Preston's private wealth management accounts. The records clearly showed massive unauthorized withdrawals. Row after row of six-figure transfers were highlighted in bright red ink, moving directly from Preston's personal holdings into Marcus's failing investment firm accounts. The exact dates of the transfers perfectly matched the timeline of their affair. The wealthy tech investors and elite society members in the audience leaned forward, reading the undeniable financial evidence. Tasha was not just an unfaithful wife, she was an active corporate embezzler. Preston brought the microphone back to his lips, his voice cutting sharply through Tasha's frantic sobbing. "You thought you could outsmart a man who built a global empire on data tracking," Preston said, his tone echoing with lethal precision. "You thought you could bleed my accounts dry to fund a broke investment banker who could not even afford his own luxury hotel suites. You thought my wealth was your personal playground." Tasha stumbled back down the stairs, rushing toward the altar. She fell hard onto her knees on the cold marble floor, her heavy gown pooling around her in a ruined mess. "Preston, please," she begged, her makeup running down her face in dark streaks. "It was a mistake. Marcus manipulated me. He told me he needed a bridge loan. I never wanted to hurt you. I love you, Preston." She turned on her lover instantly, throwing Marcus directly under the bus in a desperate attempt to save her unlimited black cards. Marcus stood frozen in the third row, his eyes widening in horror as the woman he risked a federal prison sentence for publicly betrayed him without a second of hesitation. Preston looked down at his weeping wife with absolute disgust. "I filed for divorce this morning," Preston announced, his voice booming through the concert speakers. "My lawyers have officially liquidated your access to my life. Every credit card is canceled. Every bank account is frozen. You have exactly 1 hour to get your cheap belongings out of my house before my security team throws them on the lawn. We are done." A collective gasp ripped through the audience of Atlanta's elite. The brutal public discard was something out of a corporate execution playbook. Tasha wailed loudly, burying her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably on the altar steps. I shifted my gaze to the front row where my mother Valerie was experiencing a complete psychological collapse. Valerie's entire identity, her entire sense of worth in this world was tied directly to Tasha marrying a white billionaire. Valerie had paraded Tasha around her elite African-American social circles, using Preston's wealth to secure her spot on charity boards and country club committees. Now the illusion was entirely shattered. Valerie began hyperventilating. She clutched her chest, her hand gripping the pearls around her neck as if they could somehow save her social standing. She looked around wildly at her sorority sisters and high society friends. The women who had been praising her just 20 minutes ago were now physically recoiling. They whispered behind their hands, turning their backs on her. Several prominent families were already standing up, abandoning their seats to distance themselves from the radioactive scandal. Valerie reached out a trembling hand toward the women, begging them to stay, but they ignored her completely. Valerie fell back heavily into her gold Chiavari chair, gasping for air. The perfect social image she had spent decades cultivating, ruthlessly crushing me to protect, had disintegrated into pure ash in a matter of minutes. She was instantly transformed into the ultimate social pariah. No country club would ever host her again. No charity board would ever accept her calls. She was ruined. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, watching my mother drown in the shallow waters of her own respectability politics. Julian squeezed my waist gently, a low chuckle vibrating in his chest. "This is a masterpiece, Kiara," Julian whispered, his lips brushing against my ear. "They built their own gallows." While Tasha was weeping on the marble floor, and Valerie was having a dramatic social breakdown, I noticed a sudden frantic movement in the shadows. Marcus had finally realized the sheer gravity of his situation. He looked at the powerful commercial developers and banking executives staring at him with pure, unadulterated revulsion. His own managing partner was pulling out a cell phone, likely calling the firm's legal compliance department. The catastrophic federal fraud implications were rapidly dawning on him. He was looking at decades in a federal penitentiary. Marcus slowly backed away from the third row, keeping his head down. He turned his back on his screaming mother-in-law and his sobbing mistress. Marcus sprinted toward the heavy side exit of the ballroom, escaping the crushing humiliation and incoming legal storm. Marcus slammed his shoulder against the heavy brass push bar of the side exit door, bursting into the cool night air of the estate gardens. He thought he had slipped away from the absolute apocalyptic destruction unfolding inside the grand ballroom. He planned to reach his luxury sports car and drive straight to the airport and use whatever remaining credit he had to catch a red-eye flight to the islands before the corporate lawyers could freeze his personal accounts. But his frantic escape was abruptly cut short. Standing perfectly still at the bottom of the stone steps, illuminated by the soft glow of the pathway lights, was Julian. His older brother did not look surprised or angry. Julian looked completely at peace. He watched Marcus frantically stumble down the long marble stairs. "Move out of my way." Julian, Marcus hissed, his voice cracking with absolute panic. "You do not understand what is happening in there. Preston has completely lost his mind in there, and Kiara deliberately set me up. I need to leave right now before the firm sends their compliance officers." Julian did not move a single inch. He stood his ground, forcing Marcus to halt on the bottom step. "I know exactly what is happening in there, little brother Julian," said his deep voice, carrying clearly in the quiet garden. "I helped design the entire execution. You are not going anywhere near your car." Marcus' face contorted with sheer terror and furious indignation. He violently lunged forward aggressively, attempting to shove his older brother aside, but Julian easily caught Marcus by the expensive lapels of his ruined tuxedo. Julian forcefully slammed him extremely hard against the cold stone balustrade. "You have been playing a dangerous game," Marcus, Julian stated, his grip tightening. "You thought because Kiara was a black woman who worked with her hands moving furniture, that she was somehow beneath your elite banking intellect. You underestimated the wrong woman, and you vastly underestimated me." Marcus struggled against the iron grip, gasping for air. "Let me go," he choked out. "You are my brother. You are supposed to protect family." "Family," Julian scoffed. "You destroyed your own family the second you decided to sleep with Tasha and steal her business assets. I only protect winners, Marcus. You are just a liability." Julian released his tight grip, stepping back, smoothing his own jacket. Right on cue, the thick shadows of the manicured estate gardens seemed to part. 4 men dressed in sharp dark suits stepped forward onto the illuminated pathway, moving with absolute military precision, completely surrounding the bottom of the stone steps. They were not private security. They were not local Atlanta police officers. The gold badges clipped to their belts caught the garden lights, clearly identifying them as federal agents. Marcus froze completely, his eyes darting frantically between the unsmiling agents and his older brother. The lead agent stepped up, pulling a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from the back of his belt. "Marcus Anthony, you are under arrest," the federal agent announced, his voice loud and authoritative. "Turn around and place your hands behind your back." The heavy metal cuffs ratcheted tightly around Marcus' wrists with a sharp clicking sound that echoed loudly in the night air. Several highly influential elite guests who had fled the grand ballroom to escape the chaotic scandal inside were now rushing down the beautiful garden paths. They stopped dead in their tracks, witnessing the highly respected investment banker being physically restrained by the FBI. The prominent politicians, country club board members, and wealthy socialites pulled out their smartphones instantly, recording the catastrophic downfall of the man who had spent his career acting superior to everyone else. The respectability politics that Marcus had worshipped his entire life were now the exact weapons being used to document his total humiliation. What is the meaning of this? Marcus screamed desperately, trying to salvage some shred of his destroyed dignity. You cannot arrest me. I am a senior vice president. I demand to know the charges. Julian stepped forward, ensuring his voice was loud enough for every single wealthy spectator to hear clearly. You are not a senior vice president anymore, Marcus Julian declared, projecting his voice across the garden. You were officially terminated 20 minutes ago. The agents are arresting you for federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft. You fraudulently secured a $5 million commercial loan using forged signatures to leverage a ghost company. Did you really think the federal government would not notice when a massive deposit triggered an immediate default transfer to an offshore account? You tripped every single money laundering alarm in the federal banking system. Marcus' knees buckled completely. The realization of his sheer stupidity crashed down on him. He had walked right into the trap. I did not do it alone, Marcus sobbed shamelessly, openly weeping like a coward in front of the elite crowd. She manipulated me and made me do it. She desperately needed the stolen money to maintain her lavish lifestyle. Julian smiled a cold, lethal smile. He reached inside his tailored velvet jacket and pulled out a crisp red folder. He walked over to the lead FBI agent and handed the folder directly to him. You are absolutely right, Marcus, Julian said, his tone dripping with dark satisfaction. A $5 million loan against an empty shell company requires a very wealthy secondary guarantor with massive liquid assets to underwrite the risk. The agent opened the red folder, examining the pristine digital signatures and the verified financial routing numbers. The agent nodded, his expression hardening as he confirmed the evidence. He handed the folder to his partner and pivoted away from the sobbing banker. The federal agent looked directly up the illuminated stone stairs toward the grand mahogany doors of the massive estate ballroom. Secure this suspect in the transport vehicle, the lead agent commanded his team. I am going right back inside to personally arrest the bride. The heavy mahogany doors of the grand ballroom burst open with a deafening crack that silenced the remaining whispers of the shocked elite crowd. The lead federal agent marched straight down the center aisle, flanked by two heavily armed deputies. They moved with absolute tactical precision, bypassing the rows of terrified wealthy socialites and panicked corporate investors. The guests scrambled out of their way, pulling their expensive silk gowns and tailored tuxedos back to avoid any association with the incoming law enforcement. I stood securely by Julian's side, watching the final act of this spectacular execution unfold. Tasha was still crumpled on the cold marble floor at the base of the towering floral altar. Her carefully crafted influencer makeup was completely ruined, running down her cheeks in thick, dark streams. She was still desperately sobbing for Preston to forgive her, completely oblivious to the federal agents closing in on her from behind. The lead agent stepped right over a scattered pile of white rose petals and stopped directly above my weeping sister. Natasha, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and aggravated identity theft. The agent announced, his deep voice carrying flawlessly through the cavernous ballroom. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back. Tasha's head snapped up, her eyes widening in absolute sheer terror. She looked at the federal badge clipped to the agent belt and let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed off the vaulted ceilings. No! She shrieked, scrambling backward across the marble floor like a cornered animal. You cannot arrest me. I am a prominent social media influencer. My husband is a billionaire tech CEO. Tell them, Preston. Tell them to back off right now. Preston did not even flinch. He stood with his hands casually resting in his pockets, watching her thrash on the ground with zero emotion in his freezing blue eyes. The federal agents did not wait for her to comply. Two deputies stepped forward, grabbing Tasha by the arms and hauling her forcefully to her feet. Tasha fought them wildly, kicking and thrashing with all her might. Her heavy, custom-beaded gown caught under her own designer heels. As she violently twisted away from the deputies, the expensive silk fabric ripped completely open. Thousands of tiny crystal beads snapped off the bodice, showering the hard marble floor like a localized hailstorm. The sharp clattering sound of the falling beads punctuated the absolute humiliation of her arrest. The agents effortlessly overpowered her, pinning her arms behind her back and snapping the heavy steel handcuffs securely around her wrists. At that exact moment, the side doors opened, and another group of agents dragged Marcus into the main ballroom. They were escorting him toward the front entrance for official transport. His tailored tuxedo was rumpled, and his arrogant face was pale with absolute dread. Tasha spotted him being marched past the champagne fountain, and a sudden vicious rage ignited in her eyes. The terrified, weeping bride instantly transformed into a venomous snake, turning aggressively on the very man she had risked everything to sleep with. "He forced me to do it!" Tasha screamed at the top of her lungs, straining against the federal agents holding her arms. "Marcus manipulated me into signing those loan documents. He is a predatory investment banker, and he took advantage of my trust. I am a victim here. He told me the commercial loan was perfectly legal, and he promised he would pay it back. I did not know he was forging Kiara's signature. Arrest him and let me go." Marcus stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw dropping in pure, stunned disbelief at her instantaneous betrayal. The man who had been perfectly willing to let me take the fall for his federal crimes was suddenly experiencing the exact same lethal disloyalty from his mistress. His shock rapidly morphed into explosive fury. He lunged toward Tasha, straining against his own handcuffs as the agents yanked him back. "You lying, manipulative gold digger!" Marcus roared, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "You were the mastermind behind this entire operation. You begged me to secure that $5 million loan because Preston cut off your endless supply of cash. You needed millions to maintain your fake wealthy lifestyle on the internet. You were draining his accounts to pay for your luxury brand trips, and when the money ran dry, you told me to use Kiara Company to steal the rest. You are nothing but a cheap fraud, Tasha." They stood in the middle of the extravagant ballroom, viciously tearing each other apart like rabid dogs. The elite African-American high society members watched the ultimate destruction of the golden child and the arrogant banker. The prominent judges, local politicians, and country club board members stood in stunned silence, pulling out their smartphones to record the epic downfall. They were publicly exposing their greed, their affair, and their federal crimes in front of the exact people they had spent their entire lives trying to impress. The agents grew tired of the screaming, abruptly, forcefully marching both of them out of the ballroom toward the waiting transport vehicles. Preston remained standing at the altar, completely unbothered by the chaotic scene. He looked down at the shredded pieces of Tasha's custom gown and her discarded lace veil resting on the marble steps. He calmly stepped directly over the ruined veil, walking down the center aisle with the quiet confidence of a man who had successfully excised a parasite from his life. The wealthy guests parted for him, offering silent nods of deep respect for his ruthless efficiency. Preston stopped when he reached the middle of the aisle where Julian and I were standing. He extended his hand toward me. I reached out and gave him a firm, solid handshake. "Brilliant execution," Kiara Preston said, his tone filled with genuine professional admiration. "You are a truly formidable woman, and I look forward to finalizing my corporate real estate expansion with your firm next quarter." I smiled, offering a slight nod. "It was a pleasure doing business with you, Preston." Preston turned to Julian, offering him a respectful handshake as well before continuing his march down the aisle. He walked out the grand mahogany doors of the historic estate, stepping into his waiting black limousine and driving away into the night, completely washing his hands of the catastrophic mess my family had created. The ballroom was now a buzzing hive of shocked whispers and frantic gossip. The elite guests were already pulling out their phones, texting every major social circle in Atlanta about the unprecedented scandal. I turned to Julian, ready to leave this toxic environment behind us forever. But before we could take a single step, a frantic, desperate weight slammed heavily into my side. My mother Valerie threw herself at me, grabbing both of my arms with a terrifying vice-like grip. Her perfectly manicured nails dug painfully into the fabric of my tailored blazer. Her perfect silver gown was twisted, her expensive wig was slightly askew, and her face was stained with dark-running mascara. The woman who had spent my entire life calling me a disappointment was now staring up at me with wild, unhinged desperation. "Kiara, you have to save them!" Valerie begged, her voice a shrill, hysterical shriek that cut through the murmuring crowd. "You have to save your sister right now. You own all that commercial real estate downtown. You are sitting on millions of dollars in liquid assets. You have to call your bank this instant and use your real estate money to post bail for Tasha and Marcus. They are your family, Kiara. You cannot just stand there and let the federal government take my golden child away. You have the ultimate power to stop this and fix everything." I looked down at my mother. Her perfectly manicured fingers were digging into the fabric of my tailored blazer. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as she stared up at me with wild, desperate eyes. I did not rush to comfort her. I did not offer her a shoulder to cry on. I reached down and methodically pried her hands off my arms, one finger at a time. I pushed her back firmly, forcing her to stand on her own 2 feet. Her desperate gasps echoed loudly in the quiet space left by the fleeing guests. I smoothed the wrinkles from my sleeves, looking at her not with anger but with absolute cold clarity. "I am not going to fix anything, Mother," I said, my voice perfectly level, carrying easily across the polished marble floor. "You spent your entire adult life worshipping the pathetic illusion of high society status. You ruthlessly sacrificed my mental health, my self-esteem, and my personal boundaries just so you could brag to your elite sorority sisters about your precious golden child. You taught Tasha that landing a wealthy white billionaire was her only purpose in life. You taught her that looking rich on social media was vastly more important than actually having any moral character. You literally created this monster Valerie. You fed her toxic vanity every single day until she actually believed she was completely untouchable. You sat at my dining table and allowed Marcus to humiliate me. You smiled when he froze my bank accounts. You threatened to have me blacklisted from every social circle in the city if I dared to divorce him. You did all of that to protect Tasha and her fraudulent lifestyle. And now you are standing here begging me, the daughter you constantly called a glorified furniture mover, to bail her out with my commercial real estate money." Valerie fell heavily to her knees, weeping loudly and aggressively, begging me to call my bank. She promised she would treat me better from now on. She promised I would finally be the favorite daughter. The sheer transactional nature of her conditional love made me physically sick to my stomach. She was only offering me a motherly connection because she needed my financial portfolio to save her own reputation. I stepped back, refusing to let her touch me again. "I am not spending a single cent to save them," I stated firmly, looking down at her ruined silver gown. "They committed federal wire fraud, and they did it specifically to destroy me and steal my future. You always wanted Tasha to be the center of attention, Mother. Well, you finally got your wish. Tomorrow morning, Tasha will be on the front page of every single news outlet in Atlanta. She will be the lead headline on every national gossip blog. Her weeping mugshot will be broadcast to the entire world. You should be absolutely thrilled. She is finally the most famous woman in the city." I looked up from my weeping mother and surveyed the grand ballroom. The few remaining elite socialites, the exact women Valerie had spent decades desperately kissing up to, were staring at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. Her fellow sorority sisters turned their backs on her simultaneously. They gathered their silk wraps and designer handbags, whispering aggressively as they hurried toward the nearest exits. Not a single one of them offered Valerie a hand to help her up. Not one person stayed behind to offer her comfort. In the ruthless, competitive world of Atlanta high society, a federal indictment was a contagious disease, and Valerie was now patient zero. She was left completely alone, sitting on the cold marble floor weeping bitterly among the crushed white orchids and the scattered crystal beads from Tasha's ruined custom dress. Her entire world had vanished in less than an hour, and nobody cared. Julian stepped forward, wrapping his strong protective arms securely around my waist. He did not spare my mother a single glance. We turned our backs on the smoking wreckage of my toxic family and walked down the center aisle together. We pushed through the grand mahogany doors, stepping out into the cool, refreshing night air. The heavy, oppressive atmosphere of the estate vanished instantly, leaving me feeling lighter than I had in 32 years. We walked down the illuminated stone pathway toward Julian's waiting car, leaving the chaos far behind us. As we reached the sleek black vehicle, my cell phone began to vibrate in my blazer pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the glowing screen. It was the direct private office line for the managing partner of Marcus' former investment bank. This was the exact same powerful man who had brutally shoved Marcus aside to beg me for a commercial real estate meeting earlier tonight. I answered the call, putting it on speakerphone so Julian could hear it. The managing partner cleared his throat, speaking with profound respect. "Kiara," he began. "I apologize for calling so late, but I wanted to reach you before the weekend ended. The firm has officially terminated Marcus, and we have a vacant corner office on the top floor. I know you are expanding your real estate headquarters, and I would be honored to offer you his former executive suite completely free of charge for the next 5 years. We want to sign a development contract with your firm and hope this gesture proves our dedication." The poetic justice was absolutely stunning. Marcus spent his entire adult life desperately trying to secure that exact corner office. He sacrificed his marriage and freedom just to impress the men who occupied that floor. Now the managing partner was rolling out the red carpet for me. I looked at Julian, who was smiling proudly. I pressed the phone closer to my mouth, my voice radiating total confidence. "I accept your offer," I told him. "I will have my staging crew move my furniture into Marcus' old office on Monday morning." The sun rose over Atlanta the next morning, illuminating a city that was absolutely buzzing with the most explosive scandal of the decade. The news of the federal arrests had spread like a raging wildfire through the wealthy, elite African-American social circles. My sister and my ex-husband were splashed across the front page of every major tabloid and local news network in the entire state. The headlines were utterly brutal and completely unforgiving. Tasha carefully curated internet persona dissolved into thin air before she even processed through the county booking facility. Her management agency dropped her immediately, releasing a highly publicized statement severing all ties. Every single luxury brand deal, every lucrative cosmetics sponsorship, and every paid partnership was instantly terminated. Millions of followers turned on her overnight, flooding her comment sections with intense mockery and disdain. Tasha woke up in a cold concrete holding cell, completely stripped of her custom designer gowns, her rented diamond jewelry, and her artificial digital empire. She was officially a disgraced, broke federal inmate facing massive financial restitution charges, and she was now entirely alone, with absolutely no one left to save her from ruin. Across town, inside the bleak, heavily fortified federal detention center, Marcus was experiencing his own inescapable personal hell. He paced the scuffed floor of his cramped holding cell, gripping the cold metal bars with violently shaking hands. His tailored tuxedo was severely wrinkled and stained, smelling of stale sweat and sheer mounting panic. He had desperately tried to post bail using his emergency investment funds, but every single transaction was aggressively declined. Preston had ruthlessly frozen the specific offshore routing accounts Tasha used to funnel cash to Marcus, severing his only financial lifeline. Marcus was completely trapped without a single dime to his name. Terrified and out of options, he used his one allotted phone call to dial the only person he thought could save him from a decade in a federal penitentiary. Julian stood next to me in my kitchen drinking coffee when his cell phone rang loudly. He put it on speaker, allowing Marcus' frantic voice to fill the quiet room. "Julian, you have to come down here and represent me," Marcus begged, his voice cracking with pathetic sheer desperation. "You are the best corporate lawyer in the city. You know exactly how to untangle these commercial fraud charges. Please, man, I am your own flesh and blood. I will pay you whatever you ask." Julian took a slow, deliberate sip of his black coffee, leaning casually against my marble countertop. He did not show a single ounce of familial sympathy. "Marcus, you are completely broke," Julian stated, his deep voice radiating lethal calm. "And even if you had the capital, I would never, ever take your case. I only represent winners. Marcus, you forged my client's signature on a federal document and tried to ruin her life. You are a massive liability and a convicted felon waiting to happen. Enjoy the prison food, little brother." Julian ended the call permanently, cutting Marcus off from the only brilliant legal mind that could have possibly saved him. While my treacherous ex-husband and my deceitful sister were rotting in federal custody, I was aggressively expanding my corporate empire. On Monday morning, exactly as promised, my staging crew marched directly into the prestigious investment bank. We cleared out every single trace of Marcus' miserable existence from his coveted corner office. I watched with deep, profound satisfaction as my movers hauled his cheap leather chairs out into the hallway and replaced them with my custom-imported velvet seating. I officially moved Kiara Staging Solutions and my commercial real estate holdings into the massive downtown skyscraper, cementing my absolute dominance in the corporate sector. The managing partner, who had previously ignored my entire existence, walked into my new office holding a thick, lucrative contract. He treated me like a formidable titan of industry. I sat at my new desk, crossed my legs, and confidently signed a multi-million-dollar development deal to redesign and stage the firm's entire portfolio of luxury commercial properties. In a single masterful stroke, I secured my financial legacy, completely erased Marcus from the corporate hierarchy, and solidified my reputation as an unstoppable force in the Atlanta real estate market. The brutal reality of the scandal finally crushed my mother, Valerie, and destroyed her completely. The elite country club members formally revoked her membership, citing the severe reputational damage caused by her criminal daughter. The prestigious sorority networks completely blacklisted her, ignoring her desperate phone calls and freezing her out of every single charity gala in the state. Without Preston bottomless bank accounts to fund Tasha's extravagant legal defense team, Valerie was forced to make a devastating financial sacrifice to keep her golden child from sitting in a county jail cell for the entire duration of the trial. She had to put her prized suburban mansion on the market at a massive financial loss. The sprawling home she had used to flaunt her fake wealth and constantly belittle my accomplishments was sold to a cash buyer in a matter of days. Valerie watched in weeping hysterics as the moving men packed her expensive china into cheap cardboard boxes. She desperately tried to call my office line begging for a loan, but my executive assistant politely hung up on her. Valerie was forced to relocate into a cramped, low-income apartment complex on the dark outskirts of the city, far away from the glittering wealth of Buckhead. She sat alone on a stained sofa, surrounded by moving boxes, staring at a mounting pile of legal bills she could never afford to pay. Her precious golden child was facing years in a federal prison. Her elite social standing was permanently eradicated, and her toxic respectability politics had left her completely and utterly bankrupt. She was stripped of everything she valued, forced to finally face the harsh, brutal reality of her own deeply toxic and incredibly destructive choices. The relentless machinery of the federal justice system began to grind Marcus into absolute dust. He sat in a bleak, windowless conference room inside the federal courthouse, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit that swallowed his previously arrogant physique. He was sweating profusely across the metal table from a stern federal prosecutor. His overworked public defender sat uselessly beside him. Marcus was desperately trying to throw Tasha completely under the bus, begging for a reduced sentence in exchange for a full confession. He frantically claimed Tasha was the criminal mastermind who seduced him and forced him to forge my signature to maintain her lavish lifestyle. He painted himself as a tragic victim of an influencer, manipulative greed. The federal prosecutor did not even blink. She simply reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a high-definition tablet. She pressed play and slid it across the metal table. Marcus watched in sheer absolute horror as the crystal-clear 4K video from the St. Regis air vent began to play. He heard his own confident voice bragging to Tasha about how he successfully forged my signature on the $5 million commercial loan application. He heard himself detailing the exact offshore routing strategy he planned to use to execute the massive corporate theft. The prosecutor calmly closed the tablet and informed Marcus that his pathetic attempt at a plea deal was officially rejected. They were taking him to trial and using the impeccable financial paper trail Julian and I provided to guarantee a maximum sentence. While Marcus was facing a catastrophic federal trial, Tasha was experiencing her own deeply public and entirely spectacular downfall. Preston's legal team moved with the lethal swiftness of a military strike force executing the ironclad prenuptial agreement Tasha had blindly signed years ago. Preston officially finalized her eviction from his sprawling Buckhead estate, giving her zero notice. Tasha arrived at the imposing iron gates of the mansion in a cheap rideshare vehicle, only to find her access codes completely deactivated. She screamed at the intercom demanding entry, but the heavy gates slowly swung open to reveal Preston, private security team marching down the sweeping driveway. They were carrying dozens of heavy black industrial trash bags. Tasha shrieked in absolute hysteria as the unsmiling guards casually tossed the garbage bags directly onto the dirty public sidewalk outside the estate gates. The bags split open, spilling her belongings across the concrete. Tasha fell to her knees, desperately clawing through the trash bags, searching for her expensive Cartier jewelry and rare Hermes handbags. She found absolutely nothing but cheap synthetic clothing and embarrassing counterfeit accessories. Preston had legally confiscated every single genuine designer item purchased with his wealth, leaving her with only the worthless fake replicas she had secretly bought to maintain her artificial internet persona. To make her humiliation utterly complete, a swarm of aggressive paparazzi emerged from the bushes across the street. Their camera flashes went off like rapid gunfire, capturing high-resolution images of the disgraced, crying influencer kneeling in the dirt, surrounded by garbage bags filled with counterfeit fashion. Her spectacular public eviction was uploaded to every major gossip blog before she even had a chance to stand up. The total annihilation of her precious golden child finally drove my mother Valerie to absolute sheer desperation. She managed to bypass the lobby security at my towering new downtown skyscraper and rode the glass elevator straight up to my pristine executive floor. My receptionist tried to stop her, but Valerie forcefully pushed her way into my expansive corner office. She stood in the center of my custom-designed workspace, clutching her cheap handbag. Her face was gaunt. Her posture was completely broken, and the arrogant superiority she had worn my entire life was entirely gone. "Kiara, you have to help me," Valerie sobbed, her voice cracking with pathetic desperation. "I am drowning in Tasha, mounting legal fees, and the bank is threatening to garnish my tiny pension. I have absolutely nothing left. Please, you are making millions in commercial real estate now. Just give me a small loan to keep me afloat. I promise I will be the mother you always wanted me to be." I sat behind my massive mahogany desk, resting my manicured hands smoothly on the polished surface. I looked at the woman who had allowed Marcus to abuse me, who had actively cheered when my accounts were frozen, and who had repeatedly called me a failure. I did not feel a single ounce of pity or familial obligation. "You are only standing in my office because your rich white son-in-law cut off your endless supply of cash," I stated, my voice radiating pure freezing authority. "You do not want to be a mother, Valerie. You just want an ATM to fund your shallow, pathetic obsession with high society status. You spent 32 years treating me like absolute garbage while you worshipped a daughter who turned out to be a federal criminal. I am not giving you a single cent." Go ask your country club friends for a loan. Valerie dropped to her knees on my expensive rug, wailing loudly and begging me to reconsider. I simply pressed the silent alarm button under my desk. 2 large security guards entered my office immediately. Grab this woman by the arms and escort her completely off the premises, I commanded, without breaking eye contact with her, and ensure her face is permanently added to the building banned entry list. Do not ever let her pass the lobby again. The guards hoisted my weeping mother to her feet, dragging her forcefully out of my corporate sanctuary. I listened to her hysterical sobs fade down the long hallway, permanently, severing the very last toxic string tying me to that wretched family. 3 weeks later, Marcus was officially convicted of federal wire fraud and identity theft. The stern federal judge forcefully struck his wooden gavel, preparing to read the absolute maximum sentencing guidelines aloud. The stern federal judge adjusted her glasses and looked down at the 2 disgraced individuals standing before the bench. The heavy mahogany courtroom was completely silent. You both orchestrated a calculated and malicious scheme to defraud financial institutions and steal from your own family members, the judge stated, her voice echoing with absolute finality. Marcus Anthony, for the charges of federal wire fraud and aggravated identity theft, I sentence you to 7 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Marcus' legs buckled beneath him. The United States Marshals had to physically hold him upright by his arms. He let out a pathetic whimpering sound that bounced off the cold courtroom walls. The arrogant investment banker who thought he could steal my staging business was now officially a federal inmate. The judge then turned her piercing gaze to my sister. Tasha stood shivering in her standard-issue jail uniform, her former glamorous influencer lifestyle completely stripped away. Tasha, for your active role as a co-conspirator and guarantor of the fraudulent loan, I sentence you to 3 years in federal prison, the judge declared, striking her wooden gavel. Furthermore, you are hereby ordered to pay $4 million in total financial restitution to the injured banking parties. Tasha collapsed against the defense table, weeping hysterically. The restitution order guaranteed she would be completely bankrupt for the rest of her natural life. She would never own a designer bag or step foot in a luxury country club ever again. Preston had already finalized their divorce, leaving her entirely destitute, and the federal government was about to seize whatever miserable scraps she had left. The bailiffs moved in to escort the prisoners out of the courtroom. As they clamped the heavy steel chains around Marcus' wrists, he turned his head and looked directly at me sitting in the gallery. His face was hollow and completely broken. His eyes were wide with sheer desperate terror, begging silently for a single ounce of pity from the wife he had tried to destroy. He wanted me to cry for him. He wanted me to show the world that I was a heartbroken Black woman mourning her lost marriage. I did not shed a single tear. I stood up perfectly straight, smoothing the lines of my custom-tailored crimson blazer. I looked Marcus dead in his terrified eyes, and I offered him a slow, beautiful, devastating smile. It was the smile of a woman who had just conquered her entire world. I turned on my designer heel and walked proudly out of the federal courtroom with Julian firmly and protectively by my side. We left the oppressive atmosphere of the courthouse and drove straight to an exclusive, dimly lit bourbon lounge in Buckhead. Preston was already waiting for us, sitting at a private corner booth secured behind a velvet rope. The wealthy white tech billionaire looked incredibly relaxed, sipping a glass of extremely rare single malt scotch. He raised his glass in a silent salute as Julian and I slid into the leather seats across the table from him. Preston did not offer any empty emotional platitudes or fake sympathy about the trial. He operated strictly in the ruthless currency of power and leverage, and we had just delivered a masterclass in total destruction. I have executed a lot of hostile corporate takeovers in my career, Preston said, his ice blue eyes locking onto mine with profound respect. But the surgical precision you used to eradicate those 2 parasites from our lives was absolutely spectacular, Kiara. You have a level of ruthless efficiency that I rarely see in the business sector. I raised my own glass of bourbon, meeting his intense gaze. I only protect what belongs to me, Preston, I replied smoothly. Tasha and Marcus thought they were playing a game with a naive decorator. I simply showed them what happens when you threaten a commercial real estate titan. Preston chuckled a low, dark sound of pure approval. He reached inside his tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick-bound legal document. He slid it across the polished mahogany table directly toward Julian. My primary tech firm is acquiring 3 massive software competitors next quarter, Preston stated plainly. It is going to be the largest corporate merger in the southeastern United States, and it is going to require an army of brilliant legal sharks to execute the transitions. I want your venture capital firm to represent my holding company, Julian. The contract is yours if you want it. Julian picked up the massive contract, quickly scanning the staggering financial figures listed on the first page. It was a career-defining merger that would instantly elevate Julian firm to global status. Julian looked at Preston and extended his hand across the table. It is going to cost you an absolute fortune, Preston Julian said with a razor-sharp smile. Preston shook his hand firmly. I only pay for the best, Julian, and you two are unequivocally the most dangerous players in this entire city. We finished our drinks in a highly satisfying atmosphere of mutual professional triumph. Preston paid the massive bill and walked out to his waiting limousine, moving forward with his billionaire empire completely unbothered by his ex-wife rotting in a federal holding cell. Julian and I walked out into the warm Atlanta evening, but instead of taking me back to my luxury apartment, Julian drove us into the heart of the downtown financial district. He pulled his sleek sedan into the private underground parking garage of the massive commercial skyscraper I had recently acquired. The building that Marcus had so desperately tried to lease space in was now entirely mine. Julian did not say a word as he guided me into the private executive elevator. He swiped a secure keycard and pressed the button for the absolute highest level of the tower. The elevator shot upward, my stomach fluttering with sudden intense anticipation. The silver doors slid open with a soft chime revealing the entire top floor. The massive space was completely raw and empty, stripped down to the concrete floors and exposed steel beams. But the view was absolutely breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows wrapped around the entire perimeter, offering a glittering panoramic view of the entire Atlanta skyline, shining brightly in the dark night. I walked slowly toward the glass, looking out over the sprawling city I had just conquered. My heart raced as Julian stepped up closely right behind me, his warm chest pressing firmly against my back. I stood perfectly still, letting the silence of the raw commercial space wrap around us. The lights of the Atlanta skyline stretched out for miles, painting the floor-to-ceiling glass windows with a golden glow. Julian rested his hands gently on my bare shoulders. His presence was a grounding anchor different from my former marriage. I looked down at the bustling streets, watching the headlights moving through the financial district. The empire I had quietly built from nothing was unfolding right beneath my feet. I had spent 5 years hiding my brilliance while my mother treated me like a worthless servant. Now I was standing on the top floor of a skyscraper that belonged entirely to me. You know I watched you build all of this, Julian said, his voice resonating smoothly in the empty space. I turned my head, looking at his strong profile illuminated by the city lights. He stepped up to stand shoulder to shoulder with me, staring out at the towering buildings. I saw you buying those first few commercial warehouses down by the industrial district, Julian continued, his tone filled with reverence. I saw you quietly leveraging your staging contracts to secure prime real estate deals, while Marcus was too busy bragging at the country club to notice what a financial titan he had married. I never stepped in because I respected your hustle, Kiara. I watched you constructing an unbreakable fortress in silence, while my brother tried everything to dim your light. He had absolutely no idea he was living with a master architect. I felt a sudden thick lump form in my throat. For my entire life, the people closest to me had actively refused to see my value. My mother, Valerie, had deliberately blinded herself to my intelligence because I did not fit her toxic definition of a high society trophy wife. Marcus had aggressively tried to tear me down because my natural brilliance threatened his insecurities. Even my sister Tasha had tried to steal the literal foundation of my business because she believed I was put on this earth to be her stepping stone. But Julian had seen me. He had recognized my quiet power from the very beginning, and he had never once tried to claim credit for it or shrink it down. I turned to fully face him, stepping away from the glass windows. For the first time in my life, I feel completely safe. I admitted, my voice trembling with a raw vulnerability I had never allowed anyone to witness. I have spent decades fighting for my own survival, constantly calculating my next move to avoid being used or betrayed by my own blood. I always had to be the smartest person in the room, just to protect myself from the people who were supposed to love me. But standing here with you, Julian, I do not feel like I have to wear heavy armor anymore. You are the only person who has ever truly seen me without wanting to use me. Julian gently cupped my face, tracing my cheekbone with his thumb. I will never let anyone use you again, Kiara, he promised, his voice carrying the weight of an unbreakable vow. You built your empire all on your own, and you deserve every single ounce of the glory. But you do not have to fight your battles in the dark anymore. We are standing at the top of the world right now, and I want to make sure we stay here together. He reached into the inner pocket of his velvet tuxedo jacket and pulled out a sleek black velvet box. My breath caught sharply in my chest. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind as I stared at the elegant little box. After the catastrophic failure of my marriage to Marcus, the last thing I expected tonight was a proposal. I was fiercely independent now, and I was not ready to surrender my newly won freedom. Julian saw the brief flash of panic in my eyes and let out a warm, knowing chuckle. Relax your brilliant mind, Kiara, Julian teased softly, handing the velvet box directly to me. Open it now. I took the small velvet box, my hands shaking slightly. I popped the lid open, expecting to see a massive diamond ring. Instead, resting perfectly on the smooth black satin, was a set of heavy polished brass keys, attached to a solid gold keychain engraved with both of our initials. I looked up at Julian, completely stunned and intrigued. Those are the master keys to the abandoned historic banking district down on Peachtree Street, Julian explained, his eyes burning with intense passion. I just closed the acquisition deal this morning, right before the vow renewal ceremony. I am tearing down the old structures and developing a massive state-of-the-art commercial tech campus. Preston has already agreed to anchor the project with his new software headquarters. But I do not want to build it alone, Kiara. I want you to design, stage, and co-manage the entire development. I want us to build this new empire together as absolute equal partners, 50-50 down the line. I stared silently at the heavy brass keys. The magnitude of his offer washed over me. He was offering me a massive commercial partnership to elevate me higher. He recognized my absolute worth and wanted to merge our strengths to create something unstoppable. I reached out and wrapped my arms around his neck, pulling him close. Julian wrapped his strong arms around my waist, pulling my body flush against his own. He leaned down, his lips hovering just a fraction of an inch from mine. The glittering lights of the Atlanta skyline illuminated the raw space around us, wrapping us in the golden glow of our absolute victory. Marcus was an absolute fool to want your sister for a single night, Julian whispered, his deep voice sending a violent shiver straight down my spine. I want you for life. 6 months later, the scorching summer heat settled heavily over the state of Georgia. The massive gates of the federal correctional facility slammed shut, echoing across the barren concrete yard. Tasha was standing in the suffocating heat of the prison laundry room. Her delicate hands that once held crystal champagne flutes were now raw and blistered from harsh industrial bleach. She was wearing a faded, oversized orange jumpsuit that swallowed her fragile frame. The days of custom-beaded gowns and flawless influencer makeup were a distant, completely unreachable memory. She loaded heavy, soiled uniforms into the massive industrial washing machines, wiping sweat from her forehead with a trembling arm. A stern female guard yelled at her to work faster, treating the former high society golden child like absolute garbage. Tasha bit her lip, swallowing the bitter taste of total defeat. She had traded a billionaire husband and a sprawling estate in Buckhead for a concrete cell and minimum wage prison labor. 300 miles away in a different maximum security facility, Marcus was experiencing his own inescapable personal nightmare. He was down on his hands and knees, scrubbing the filthy floor of cell block D with a cheap, bristled brush. His tailored Italian suits and arrogant executive smirk were entirely gone, replaced by the harsh, brutal reality of serving federal time. The other inmates walked past him, deliberately kicking dirty water from their heavy boots onto the section of the floor he had just cleaned. Marcus kept his head down, his jaw clenched tight in silent humiliation. He used to walk into elite country clubs expecting everyone to bow to his banking expertise. Now he was completely stripped of his dignity, surviving in a cage where his corporate vocabulary meant absolutely nothing. He was just another disgraced convict serving a 7-year sentence, while the woman he desperately tried to destroy was currently conquering the world. The absolute destruction of my toxic family extended far beyond the prison walls. In a cramped, dimly lit, low-income apartment on the forgotten outskirts of Atlanta, my mother Valerie sat alone on a cheap, worn-out sofa. The walls around her were completely bare, stripped of the expensive artwork and socialite photographs she used to proudly display. The silence in the small apartment was absolutely deafening. She had no country club luncheons to attend, no charity galas to plan, no wealthy friends calling her phone. She was a total social ghost. Valerie stared blankly at the small television resting on a plastic stand. The daytime news broadcast was playing, and my face filled the entire screen. I was sitting on a plush velvet chair in a professional television studio, wearing a pristine white designer suit. The news anchor was eagerly interviewing me about my latest multi-million-dollar commercial real estate acquisition. Valerie watched her despised daughter confidently discussing the massive revitalization of the historic banking district. She watched me being hailed as a visionary titan of industry. Valerie reached for a cheap glass of tap water, her hand shaking violently. She had sacrificed her entire life to protect a golden child who was currently washing prison laundry, while the daughter she actively threw away was reigning over the entire city. She was forced to swallow the agonizing truth that she had bet her entire future on the wrong child. Later that exact evening, the Atlanta night sky was illuminated by sweeping bright searchlights. The historic banking district that Julian and I had successfully acquired was completely transformed. The abandoned structures had been masterfully renovated into a stunning state-of-the-art tech campus. Tonight, we were hosting a lavish charity gala to officially unveil the massive development to the public. Hundreds of elite guests poured into the grand atrium, which was decorated with towering crystal chandeliers and modern art installations. The guest list included the most powerful politicians, corporate developers, and tech billionaires in the southeastern United States, including Preston, who was happily networking near the open premium bar. Julian and I stood at the top of the grand glass staircase surveying our incredible empire. I wore a breathtaking emerald silk gown that commanded absolute attention, and Julian looked like a king in his tailored black tuxedo. We were the undeniable power couple of Atlanta, deeply respected for our ruthless business brilliance and our unyielding loyalty to one another. The wealthy elites who used to look past me now practically fell over themselves trying to secure a simple introduction. The respectability politics that my mother worshipped were entirely irrelevant because Julian and I did not just participate in high society, we completely owned it. The ambient music slowly faded away as Julian handed me a silver microphone. I stepped forward, looking out over the sea of powerful individuals who had gathered in our spectacular building. A hush fell over the massive atrium. I raised my glass of sparkling water, and the crowd eagerly followed my lead. I want to thank every single person in this room for being here tonight. I began, my voice projecting clearly with effortless authority. We built this commercial campus to prove that absolute resilience and strategic vision can transform even the most abandoned spaces into something truly spectacular. But I also want to take a moment to offer a very special and personal thank you. I paused, letting my gaze sweep across the silent room. I want to thank everyone who ever underestimated me. I said, a knowing smile playing on my lips. I want to thank the people who tried to dim my light, and the people who mistakenly believed I was only meant to exist in the background. Your arrogance provided the exact fuel I needed to conquer this entire city. You taught me how to fight in the dark so I could eventually rule in the light. The crowd erupted into thunderous applause. The wealthy investors and corporate executives cheered loudly, completely captivated by my strength. I turned away from the crowd and looked directly at Julian. He was staring at me with a look of profound, absolute adoration. He did not want to control me. He did not want to steal my success. He simply wanted to stand beside me while I took over the world. Julian stepped forward, wrapping his strong arms securely around my waist and pulling me close against his chest. I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling completely safe, completely seen, and incredibly powerful. The camera flashes from the society photographers illuminated the grand staircase, capturing the exact moment I fully embraced my magnificent destiny. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the victim. I was the undisputed queen of Atlanta, holding my massive empire in one hand and the exact man who truly valued me in the other. True power is forged in silence, not through loud validation. This story teaches us that your value should never be dictated by toxic family members who constantly underestimate you. While others obsessed over superficial status and dangerous lies, Kiara quietly built an unshakable empire. She proved that the best revenge isn't a screaming match. It is massive, undeniable success. When you stop seeking approval from those committed to misunderstanding you, you free yourself to reach your highest potential. Are you ready to reclaim your narrative and thrive? Tell us which firm boundary you set today